Week 1 is officially in the books for the NFL, and with that, we are now looking forward to week number 2, which means this is our waiver wire episode. We are going to be talking about players that you should be adding to your fantasy rosters. We are also going to be highlighting some of the studs as well as some of the duds that took place in week 1. But let's go ahead and kick it off on a high note with some of the studs that we saw performing really well in fantasy. And we're going to start it off with Justin Fields from the New York Jets, who put up 29.52 points in PPR formats, going for 218 passing yards on 16 for 22 attempts and 1 touchdown. Also had 12 carries for 48 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. And what Justin Fields did was have a fantastic debut. He was able to connect with Garrett Wilson a couple times and really help him out. We also saw him effectively using his skill set on the ground. Now he will be facing a Buffalo Bills defense that just gave up a huge performance to Lamar Jackson, and I believe that with a quarterback such as Justin Fields that provides a high ceiling, he is going to be a weekly player that you can add comfortably at the quarterback position going forward for the 2025 season. Now, our running back that really did well was King Henry, Derrick Henry from the Baltimore Ravens. He put up 30.2 fantasy points, had 18 carries for 169 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. He caught his lone target for 13 yards. Derrick Henry is someone that I'm still going to be adding regardless of the upcoming tough matchup that he is going to be having versus the Cleveland Browns, who last season in 2024 were a top 10 defense in allowing the fewest points to opposing running backs on a points per game basis. And this defense did the exact same thing in week 1, where they allowed the fewest points. Rather, they were also in the top 10 in the same category in week 1 as well. Now, another player worth highlighting is going to be Zay Flowers. In week 1, he put up 29.1 points on 7 receptions on 9 targets for 143 yards and had also 1 touchdown. And the reason why I'm highlighting him is because he was someone that a lot of people were really skeptical on, and a lot of the argumentation towards fading Zay Flowers was we saw Lamar Jackson have a fantastic season, and even then we saw Zay Flowers not really have a ceiling that was one that should have matched the great production that we saw from Lamar Jackson. However, we're seeing right now that Zay Flowers is someone that was hyper targeted in this offense and someone that I think could continue this sustainability. And despite the upcoming tough matchup that he will have versus Cleveland, Zay Flowers is someone that you still got to be putting out there, considering that he has such a strong offense surrounding him with, of course, Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson under center. Now, the last stud I want to highlight is going to be Brock Bowers from the Las Vegas Raiders. He put up 16.3 fantasy points in PPR formats on 5 receptions, 8 targets, 103 yards. He was second in targets, only behind Jacoby Myers, who had 10 targets in this matchup. And Brock Bowers is someone that you're going to set, forget going forward. Not much takeaway there other than that Brock Bowers is really good at fantasy football. Now, of course, with every single stud, we also had some duds, and I wouldn't be objective if I didn't mention a Philadelphia Eagle, and that's going to be AJ Brown, who only put up 1.8 points in fantasy this past week. I am not worried about it long term. He will be going up against the Kansas City Chiefs in what will be a rematch of last year's Super Bowl. I expect that AJ Brown is not going to have to worry about reading the book on excellence, but he will just need to get ready to show up and show out. I believe that he will have a great bounce back week in week 2, and same could be said with his partner Devontae Smith, who only put up 4 fantasy points in last week's matchup, but I believe he is due for a bounce back game. And same also with Jamar Chase, who in a division matchup versus Cleveland, which is a very tough defense already, as we spoke about, only had 4.6 fantasy points on 2 receptions, 5 targets, 26 yards. So really held in check. But of course, this was a division game versus a tough defense. I expect the bounce back to be in line in week 2. Now, a quarterback that really didn't do well, that I was hoping that would do great in the very favorable matchup, was going to be Bo Nix. Bo Nix only had 6.84 fantasy points through 2 picks in this game. Looked really sloppy. Denver was able to still come out with the win, and I expect a better production from Bo Nix in week 2. And Mark Andrews, a dud also at the tight end position, only had a 1.5 points on 1 reception, 1 target, 5 receiving yards. And then to round out the duds, we're going to be talking about Caleb Johnson, who put up negative 0.2 fantasy points by only having 1 carry and negative 2 yards. And what's concerning about Caleb Johnson is that we heard murmurs about how he wasn't doing really well in training camp as far as pass blocking, and with Jaylen Warren getting his extension and really shining in week 1, it's going to be very tough starting Caleb Johnson confidently, but I believe that he's someone that you can still hold on to. He's not necessarily a drop candidate just yet, but of course tread carefully when starting Caleb Johnson in your fantasy rosters. Now let's go ahead and go over some waiver wire additions that you have to be going after, and the first one, which I anticipate will be a very popular one, is going to be Quentin Johnston out of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, he was only rostered in 3.5% of ESPN rosters going into week 1. The third-year wide receiver out of TCU had a fantastic start to his 2025 campaign. He had 5 receptions on 7 targets for 79 receiving yards, had 2 touchdowns, and had a strong 21% target share. And what gives me really optimistic about Quentin Johnston is that Justin Herbert had a game where he threw 34 times, had over 300 yards, and was equally distributing all the passes to his wide receivers. He had Keenan Allen, who made his return back to the Chargers with 10 targets, had 7 receptions, 68 yards. Ladd McConkey, 6 receptions, 9 targets for 74 yards. And the matchup in week 2 is very juicy with Johnston going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. So I expect good things for this offense in general. And with that, of course, Quentin Johnston making him a strong add in the waiver wire in week 2. Another receiver that I'm going to be highlighting is going to be Kayshon Boutte, who was only rostered in 0.5% of ESPN rosters. Now, the New England Patriots wide receiver had 6 receptions on 8 targets for 103 yards. Also was able to finish the day with 17.3 PPR points, and he actually tied for the team high in receptions with 6, and he led all Patriots wide receivers with 8 targets. And the matchup versus the Miami Dolphins could be very interesting considering that it is a division matchup. However, this is the same Miami Dolphins team that we saw get absolutely obliterated, and with that could be a favorable start in a flex position for you in week 2. That is going to be Kayshon Boutte from the Patriots as a must-add for this upcoming week. This next player may not be available in your leagues, but Marquise Hollywood Brown from the Kansas City Chiefs was only rostered in 50% of ESPN leagues, so go ahead and take a quick look to see if he's available. As I mentioned in the previous video, he actually was a PPR monster with 10 receptions, 16 targets for 99 yards, and it was crazy. He had a target share that was absolutely ridiculous at 75%. Now, of course, that is in no way sustainable. However, we saw the chemistry that he had with Patrick Mahomes really pay dividends, and with the uncertainty that we have with Xavier Worthy, who left the game early with injury, I think Hollywood Brown is someone that you can start confidently, considering that, of course, like I said, he already has that chemistry with Patrick Mahomes, and I think this is something that can continue progressing forward, especially if, God forbid, Xavier Worthy was to miss some extended amount of time. Going into week 2, though, I would temper expectations because the Kansas City Chiefs are facing a very tough Philadelphia Eagles secondary that actually was one of the best defenses last year by being 6th in allowing the fewest points to opposing wideouts on a points per game basis in fantasy. So Hollywood Brown, someone that you should be adding, but may not be available considering that he was rostered in 50% of ESPN leagues going into week 1. Week 1 also featured a lot of duds at the quarterback position. We saw, for example, Bryce Young not do well. CJ Stroud didn't all have a great outing. Bo Nix, who I mentioned earlier as well. And same thing with Cam Ward and Joe Burrow. But if you are looking to add a quarterback to help improve your situation, we have some 2 solid ones here to help you out. And the first one is going to be Daniel Jones from the Indianapolis Colts, who's only rostered in 4.9% of ESPN leagues. Now, in his debut, he threw he had 22 completions on 29 attempts, also threw for 272 passing yards, had 1 touchdown, 7 carries for 26 yards on the ground to go along with 2 touchdowns, and we saw him really rejuvenate this offense, and the beneficiaries of that was his tight end Tyler Warren, who had 9 targets, as well as Michael Pittman Jr., his main wide receiver, who had 8 targets. And Jones will be facing a tough matchup in week 2 going up against the Denver Broncos Broncos, who actually allowed the fewest passing yards to any quarterback last week with 112 only allowed to Cam Ward. But regardless, though, if you are in a pinch, I think that Daniel Jones is someone that you can still start. But at the meantime, if you are looking for better matchups, he's someone that you can at least stash in your bench, considering that this offense looks really rejuvenated with Daniel Jones under center. And another quarterback that you should be targeting is going to be Michael Penix Jr. from the Atlanta Falcons, who was only rostered in 20% of ESPN leagues going into week 1. Now, he threw for 298 passing yards. He had 27 completions on 42 attempts, also had 6 carries for 21 yards on the ground to go along with 1 touchdown. And quite frankly, the thing that made Michael Penix so impressive in week 1 was that he looked poised. He looked like he had this offense under control. He had a very impressive 18-play series that was able to get capped off with a rushing touchdown, and he also put his team in a great position to tie the game by marching down the field 60 yards on 8 plays that unfortunately led to the missed field goal to tie the game in regulation. As predicted, Drake London had a fantastic start to his season by having a 35% target share that netted him 15 targets with Michael Penix there under center. And of course, Drake London is currently being evaluated in his day-to-day with a shoulder sprain, so we'll see how he does. But Michael Penix Jr. is someone that I would still feel confident starting, because we even saw Kyle Pitts have a strong outing, and of course I saw the great athleticism with Bijan Johnson, was able to have an explosive 50-yard reception that really helped boost his fantasy production in week 1. And with the Atlanta Falcons facing the Minnesota Vikings, I feel very confident with Michael Penix Jr. as a start at the quarterback position in week 2. And we have 2 more players to go over, but before we do so, I am so close to 1,000 subscribers, and that cannot be done without your support. So if you are getting value in this video, do me a huge solid. Hit the like button as well as the subscribe button. Let's go over these last 2 players. And this next player is going to be tight end Juwan Johnson from the New Orleans Saints, who's only rostered in 1.2% of ESPN leagues. He had 8 receptions on 11 targets, 75 yards in the air for a total of 15.6 fantasy points in PPR formats. That was good for tight end 2 overall. Johnson was actually the second highest targeted player within this offense behind Chris Olave's 13 targets. Now, Spencer Rattler did throw the ball out 40 plus times, so I don't expect this to be something that could be occurring every single week. However, Juwan Johnson is already one of the league's most athletic tight ends, and I believe that with a healthy target share, he can be someone that you can trot out on a weekly basis, considering that last season in 2024, he actually ended the year strong with multiple games with 6+ targets or more. Now, if you are a fantasy manager that is owning George Kittle, the report came out earlier in the week that unfortunately he's going to be missing a couple of weeks, so Juwan Johnson could be someone that you can slide in his place. And also, speaking of the 49ers, they are going to be facing this very exact same Saints team, and with the Niners already short George Kittle, there's also talks about Brock Purdy potentially being out for week 2. This could be a fantastic opportunity for all you Juwan Johnson owners to be able to leverage this opportunity to have a great outing for him for a second straight week. And the last player that we're going to be going over, if you haven't already noticed, there aren't any running backs. It is really shallow in the waiver wire, and listen, most leagues that I'm in, but I'm going to be mentioning one. That's going to be Dylan Sampson from the Cleveland Browns, who's only rostered in 32.7% of ESPN leagues. Sampson had only 12 carries for 29 rushing yards. Sampson made his mark in the receiving game, caught 8 of his receptions for 64 yards. He also out-touched Jerome Ford in this matchup 20-7, and he also was very effective, as I said, as that change of pace back within this offense. Now, the one reservation I do have is that Quinshon Judkins is expected to play in week 2 versus Baltimore, at the very least, because of his ability to be a strong change of pace back for this Cleveland Browns offense. He is someone that is at least worth stashing or maybe even using on a weekly basis in your flex spot. Thank you so much for making it to the very end of this video. Do me a huge solid. We are closing in on 1,000 subscribers, and that cannot be done without your support. So if you're getting value, hit the like button as well as the subscribe button, and check out some of these other videos, and be sure to tune in at the end of the week where we will be going over some must starts that you need to be adding to your rosters just in time for week 2. But in the meantime, take care. God bless. Peace.